The Magnolia Trailer Park on the southern edge of Conroe hadn't seen a renovation since the 90s. Rusted metal houses stood in tight rows, connected by a tangled network of makeshift electrical wires. The smell of burnt oil, cheap beer, and hopelessness hung in the air. Devontae Flood awoke to the humming of the refrigerator. The old unit was malfunctioning, but he couldn't throw it away. There was no money for a new one. Devontae opened his eyes with difficulty and looked at his watch. 6 in the morning. Too early to get up if he didn't have a job. And he didn't have a job today. Almeda was sleeping quietly next to him. She had an 8 o'clock shift, first at the Dawn Motel, then at the laundry. 12 hours on her feet for minimum wage. Devontae looked at his wife without much tenderness. They'd been married 5 years ago, when he'd thought life was about to get better. He'd get a good job, she'd finish her courses, and they'd move out of this dump. It hadn't worked out. Devontae got up quietly, trying not to wake Almeta. From the bathroom mirror, a gaunt face with reddened eyes looked back at him. Lately, he'd often woken up in a sweat. His muscles ached, and his mouth was so dry it felt like he'd swallowed sandpaper. Devontae put it down to bad alcohol and stress. Shitty life, he muttered, opening the medicine cabinet. It held his pills, the usual painkillers and antipyretics from the drugstore. He swallowed 2 capsules, drinking tap water. It usually got easier by morning. Almeda woke up when Devontae was already drinking coffee in the tiny kitchen of their trailer. "Good morning," she said, wiping her eyes. "Are you going out today?" "Maybe Jelani's got something to do," Devontae answered vaguely. "He said his cousin had some work for him at a construction site." Almeda nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. Devontae was bringing money into the house less and less often, and the excuses were becoming less convincing. "I'm on until 9 tonight," she said, pulling a maid's uniform out of the closet. "There are beans and leftover chicken in the refrigerator." Devontae didn't answer. He knew he wouldn't be interested in food by tonight. He had other plans. When Almeda left, Devontae pulled out an old gym bag from under the bed. There was a bag of white powder, his insurance for a rainy day. For months, he had been reselling small quantities of cocaine bought from a dealer he knew in Houston. Nothing serious, just a way to make a little extra money when the going got tough. And the going was almost always tough. Devontae put the bag back, took a shower, and stepped out of the trailer. The heat immediately enveloped him like a wet blanket. July in Texas spared no one, especially those who couldn't afford proper air conditioning. He headed toward Jelani's trailer. He was sitting on the steps, sipping a beer despite the early morning. "Out of work again?" Jelani asked, handing Devontae a can. "Neither are you," Devontae grinned, taking the beer. "Any word from your cousin?" "Never mind him," Jelani said. "He pays a penny and makes me work like a horse. I got a better idea." Devontae was wary. Jelani's ideas rarely turned out well. "I've got the keys to the warehouse on Main Street," Jelani said quietly. "There's power tools and stuff. There's no watchman in the evening, only cameras, but they're just for show." "No, I'm not getting into that." Devontae shook his head. "I'm still on probation. Suit yourself." Jelani shrugged. "Then stay broke." Devontae finished his beer and stood up. He felt a little dizzy, but he was used to the sensation. "I got money," he said. "Just not for you." Jelani hummed but didn't say anything back. They both knew that Devontae was running some kind of business of his own, but they preferred not to go into details. At the other end of the trailer park, in the tiny one-room rundown apartment she rented for $150 a week, Aisha Dunkley painted her lips in front of a cracked mirror. Her shift at the rusty nail bar started at 11 and lasted until closing time. The work was lousy, but they paid cash and didn't ask for ID. Aisha was prettier than her older sister, slimmer, with more expressive features. But life did not spoil her. After school, she scraped by on odd jobs until she got a job as a waitress. The tips were good, especially when she smiled at certain customers and didn't mind touching them. Sometimes it ended up in extra earnings at the motel across the street from the bar. Aisha wasn't proud of it, but there wasn't much choice. College was a pipe dream for someone like her, and she'd had a hard time finishing high school, studying sporadically and skipping a lot of classes. Their mother died of an overdose when Aisha was 15 and Almeda 18. They never knew their father. Since then, the sisters have survived as best they could. Aisha's relationship with Almeda was complicated. The older sister had always been the right one. She worked 2 jobs, paid her taxes, went to church on Sundays. She had married Devante, hoping for stability, but had only gotten an additional burden. Aisha thought her sister was wasting her life on this slacker. Finished with her makeup, Aisha sipped her instant coffee and looked at the bills spread out on the table. Rent, electricity, health insurance, the cheapest, almost useless, phone credit. Money was woefully short. Lately, clients had become stingier on tips, and there were fewer and fewer extra appointments. There was a knock on the door as she was about to leave. Devante stood on the doorstep with a bottle of cheap whiskey. "What the hell are you doing here?" Aisha asked, not letting him inside. "Does Almeda know you're at my place?" "She's at work until tonight," Devante smirked, pushing through the door. "I thought we could have a little fun." "I have to go to work," Aisha replied dryly. "Come on, you've got 2 more hours." He set the bottle on the table. "I hear you're having money problems." Aisha tensed. How did he know? "I can help," Devante continued, pulling some crumpled bills out of his pocket. $200, just for the company." "I don't sleep with my sister's husbands," Aisha cut him off, though the money came in handy. "Who said anything about sleeping around?" Devante grinned. "Just a drink, a chat. Almeda would never know." He moved closer, and Aisha could smell his cologne, cheap but pleasant. Something in his confidence, in the way he looked at her, made her hesitate. $250, Devante said, adding another bill. "And I'll help you with next month's rent." Aisha took the money and tucked it into the pocket of her jeans. "Just whiskey, nothing else," she said, pulling out glasses. Devante smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. Their friendship began that very day. Devante came over once a week, always with money and booze. At first, they just talked and drank. Then there was touching, kissing, and eventually bed. Aisha told herself she was doing it for the money, but there was another reason. She liked to take something away from her older sister, who always thought she was better, truer, more successful. Devante always came in on days when Almeda worked late. He never stayed overnight and always paid cash. For Aisha, it was a transaction. For him, it was entertainment and a way to assert his ego. His marriage to Almeda had long ago become a routine. They barely spoke and rarely had sex. With Aisha, it was different, passionate, forbidden, dangerous. One day after their meeting, Devante felt worse than usual. He felt chilly, and a strange rash appeared on his skin. He had noticed for a long time that his health was deteriorating. Constant fatigue, night sweats, sometimes unexplained weight loss. But he didn't go to the doctors. No insurance, no money. And anyway, why would he? Probably just a lingering flu or stress from a lousy life. He bought drugs at the pharmacy, swallowed them by the handful, drinking whiskey or beer. It got better, but not for long. The key was to hide the symptoms from others, especially Almeda. She would make him go to the clinic, and there would be questions, tests, and bills. Aisha, too, began to notice changes in her body. At first, it had been small things, quick fatigue, muscle aches. Then came frequent colds that didn't go away for weeks. She put it down to hard work in a smoky bar, lack of sleep, and stress. After all, who had an easy life? One night, while serving a table of drunken truckers, she felt so weak she almost fell over. The room swam before her eyes. The tray of bottles slipped from her hands. The bartender sent her home, saying she looked like a walking corpse. Upon reaching her trailer, Aisha collapsed on her bed right in her clothes. She had slept for 14 straight hours, but woke up just as shattered. The mirror reflected a pale face with black eyes. "Gotta quit the night shifts," she muttered, swallowing aspirin. There was a knock on the door. Aisha knew who it was. The day of the week, the time, everything matched. Devante stood on the doorstep with the usual kit, booze and money. "You look terrible," he said in lieu of a greeting. "Thanks for the compliment," Aisha snapped back. "I don't feel well. Let's do it another time." Devante frowned. He wasn't feeling his best either, but he wasn't about to pass up an opportunity for fun. "I got $300, he said, holding out the money. "And that favorite whiskey of yours you always ask for." Aisha hesitated. She needed the money badly, especially now that she'd missed her shift at the bar. "Okay," she gave in, taking the bills. "But just a drink. I'm serious. I'm in no shape for the rest." Devontae nodded, hiding his disappointment. He made his way into the room and sat in the only chair while Aisha searched for clean glasses. "Does Almeida suspect anything?" she asked, pouring the whiskey. "No," Devontae grinned. She was too busy with her 2 jobs and her dreams of a better life. There was an unconcealed sneer in his voice. Aisha cringed. She didn't like it when he talked about her sister like that. No matter how complicated their relationship was, Almeta was still her only family. "You should at least get a decent job," Aisha said, sipping her whiskey. "She's working 2 jobs, and you're what?" "Don't start," Devontae said. "I have my own ways of making money. Where do you think I get the money for you?" Aisha didn't bother to ask. She guessed his earnings involved something illegal, but she preferred not to know the details. It was safer that way. They sat and drank in silence. Devontae stole a glance at Aisha. She did look sick. Her skin was pale, her eyes inflamed. He thought he might have infected her with his cold. Oh well, she'll get over it somehow. He was living. Aisha caught his gaze and smiled weakly. Despite his flaws, there was something appealing about him. Maybe the danger he radiated. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not as his wife's sister, but as a desirable woman. "One more and we're done," she said, refilling the whiskey. "I have to work tomorrow." Devontae nodded, but he was already mentally planning how he would talk her into more. After all, he hadn't brought that money for nothing. The clinic on the outskirts of Conroe didn't inspire confidence. The peeling paint on the walls, the cracked linoleum, the dim daylight bulbs flickering under the ceiling. But it was the only place where Aisha could get medical care without insurance or asking questions. A free government program for the poor, the last refuge of those with nowhere else to go. Aisha sat on the hard plastic chair in the hallway, tapping her foot nervously on the floor. It had been a week since she'd given blood, and she was supposed to get the results today. The condition was getting worse. Constant weakness, night sweats, an unexplained rash on her body. Fear gnawed at her insides, but she chased the gloomy thoughts away. "Dunkley!" The nurse looked out of the office, checking the list. "Aisha Dunkley." Aisha stood up, feeling her knees shake. Inside the office smelled of sanitizer and old paper. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged woman with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much human suffering. "Have a seat, Ms. Dunkley." The doctor pointed to the chair across from her. "I'm Dr. Wilson. I have your test results." Something in her tone made Aisha tense. She'd heard that voice, calm, detached, with a hint of professional sympathy, in movies when doctors gave patients dire diagnoses. "How bad is it?" Aisha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Wilson looked her straight in the eye. "Your HIV test is positive." The world around her froze. The sounds disappeared as if someone had pressed the off button on a remote from reality. Aisha saw the doctor's lips moving, but she couldn't hear the words. Only one thought was bouncing around in her head. "This is a mistake. It can't be true." Dr. Wilson's voice broke through the fog in Aisha's mind. "I'm so sorry. HIV?" Aisha asked, as if she might have heard a different answer. "Am I dying?" "HIV is not a death sentence right now," Dr. Wilson said. "With the right treatment, you can lead an almost normal life. There are drugs that control the virus and prevent it from destroying your immune system." Aisha listened, half listening. She was trying to comprehend what had happened. HIV, the 3 letters that would now define her entire life. How? She swallowed the lump in her throat. How could I have gotten infected? HIV is transmitted through blood, semen, vaginal secretions, breast milk, Dr. Wilson mechanically listed. The most common routes are unprotected sex and sharing needles for injections. Aisha closed her eyes. The faces of the men she'd been intimate with over the past year came to mind. Customers from the bar, casual acquaintances, and Devontae, especially Devontae, who she'd been seeing regularly for the past 3 months. "Do I need to inform, partners?" she asked quietly. "That's your right, but I strongly recommend it." The doctor nodded. "They should be tested. Your loved ones may be infected and not know it. Aisha imagined telling Almeta that she had slept with her husband and possibly infected them both with HIV. The thought made her throat feel nauseous. "What am I going to do now?" she asked, feeling small and lost. "We'll talk about treatment options now, Doctor," Wilson said. "There are some programs for people without insurance." The rest of the meeting passed like a blur. Aisha nodded, signed some papers, received prescriptions and brochures. It all seemed unreal, like a terrible dream from which it was impossible to wake up. When she left the clinic, she just stood on the sidewalk, not knowing where to go. Cars passed by, people passed by, life went on, for everyone but her. Her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from the boss. "Where are you?" Shift started an hour ago. Aisha turned her phone off. She couldn't see anyone today. She got home on autopilot. She locked the door, closed the curtains, and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled in her head, one darker than the next. Who had infected her? When had it happened? How long did she have left? How would she pay for her medication? Who would she tell? There were no answers, only emptiness and fear. Aisha woke up the next morning with eyes swollen with tears and a determination to act. She couldn't change her diagnosis, but she had to find out who she had contracted it from so she could warn others. The list of potential candidates wasn't as long as one might think. Over the past year, she had 4 regulars from the bar she sometimes met at the motel, and Devante. With the clients, she'd always insisted on defending herself. But with Devante, it was different with him. He was her sister's husband, and somehow that gave the illusion of safety, even though there was no logic to it. Aisha decided to start with the simplest thing possible. Call clients under the pretense of meeting and gently find out if any of them were sick. It wasn't an ideal plan, but she couldn't think of any other. The first 2 conversations yielded nothing. Both men agreed to the meeting, sounded as normal, no sign of illness in their voices she could pick up. The third didn't respond. The fourth, Ray, a trucker from Louisiana, said he was on a road trip and wouldn't be in Conroe for another week. "I called to see if you were okay," Aisha asked cautiously. "Why, baby, are you worried about me?" Ray grinned. "I'm fine, but my back hurts from the long drive. Why?" "Just asking," she said evasively. "I'll see you when you get back." As she hung up the phone, Aisha felt both relieved and anxious. On the one hand, it was unlikely that any of the clients were the source of the infection. She had always been careful with them. On the other, that left only one person, Devante. The thought that it was her sister's husband who could have infected her made her nauseous. If that was the case, then Almeta was in danger as well, or maybe already infected. Aisha decided she needed to confront Devante face to face and ask him directly. But first, she had to make sure her suspicions had a basis. She got out of the trailer for the first time in 2 days and headed to the supermarket. She needed to buy groceries and the medicine the doctor had prescribed. Heavy clouds hovered over the city, promising a thunderstorm, perfect weather for her mood. At the supermarket, Aisha ran into Marcus, a mutual acquaintance who sometimes bought cocaine from Devante. They had never been close, just saying hello when they met. But today, Marcus seemed unusually friendly. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, stopping next to Aisha's cart. "How are you?" "Fine," she answered briefly, not wanting to talk. "Devante hasn't been showing up lately either," Marcus continued. "Did something happen in your family?" "Nothing you should know about," Aisha cut him off, but then softened. Perhaps Marcus could tell her something useful. "Why? Are you looking for him?" "Just business," Marcus answered evasively. "I thought maybe he was having the same problems LaShonda was having." "LaShonda?" Aisha tensed. It was a name she'd heard before. Devante had mentioned some LaShonda he'd dated before Almeta. "Yeah, his ex-girlfriend," Marcus nodded. "You don't know her? That's odd. I thought you all knew each other." "Not very well," Aisha answered cautiously. "What happened to her?" Marcus looked around as if checking to see if anyone was listening and lowered his voice. "She died a month ago. A IDS, I thought you knew." Aisha felt the ground go from under her feet. Devante's ex-girlfriend had died of AIDS a month ago. It couldn't have been a coincidence. "No, I didn't know." She managed to keep her voice steady, even though her insides were turning. "I'm sorry." "Yeah, it's a lousy story." Marcus sighed. That's why I wanted to talk to Devante. They've been together a long time before your sister. He should get checked out. Of course. Aisha nodded absently. I'll tell him if I see him. Marcus said goodbye and left, leaving Aisha in a state of shock. Now the picture was beginning to take shape. Devante was dating a woman who had died of AIDS. He himself had seemed sick lately, and his strange behavior, his constant taking of some kind of pills. Aisha dropped the grocery cart in the middle of the store and ran outside. She needed to talk to Devante right away, but not over the phone, face to face. She knew Almeida was working late that day. Devante had to be home alone. The rain had already started when she reached the flood's trailer. Heavy drops drummed on the metal roof, creating an ominous accompaniment to her thoughts. She knocked on the door. No one answered. Knocked harder. Silence. Aisha knew where Almeta hid the spare key, under the flower pot by the steps. She and her sister had never been close, but they shared such small things. Aisha found the key and opened the door. Inside smelled of stale air and something medical. There were dirty plates and empty beer bottles on the kitchen table. Typical bachelor mess when the wife wasn't home. "Devante?" Aisha called out, walking into the back of the trailer. "Are you in here?" There was no answer, but there was the sound of water coming from the bathroom. He was taking a shower. Aisha decided to wait for him in the living room, but her gaze fell on the open medicine cabinet on the kitchen table. Inside were colorful vials of pills. She picked up one of them and read the name, then a second, a third. The blood froze in her veins. These were no ordinary painkillers. They were antiretrovirals, drugs for people with HIV, the same ones Dr. Wilson had told her about. With trembling hands, Aisha put the vials back in their place. There was no more doubt. Devante knew of his diagnosis, knew and kept silent, continuing to meet her without protection, infecting not only her, but his wife, her sister. The sound of the water stopped. Aisha froze, not knowing what to do next. Part of her wanted to run away. Another part of her wanted to stay and tell him everything she thought about people like him. The decision came naturally when the bathroom door opened and Devante stepped out, a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked surprised to see her. "Aisha? What are you doing here?" She silently pointed to the medicine cabinet. "I know you have HIV," she said quietly, "and I know you know it." Devante froze for a moment, then his face contorted. "You went through my stuff?" he hissed. "What the hell?" "I just found out I have HIV," Aisha said, feeling the rage rising inside. "And you're the only one who could have infected me." Devante averted his eyes. The gesture was an admission of guilt more eloquent than any words. "I met Marcus," Aisha continued. "He told me about LaShonda, about her dying of AIDS a month ago. You knew, didn't you? You knew and you kept sleeping with me and Almeta anyway." "It's not that simple," Devante began to justify himself. "I wasn't sure." "Don't lie," Aisha shouted, pointing to the medication. "You have antiretroviral drugs. You knew your diagnosis and you kept quiet." Devante sighed and slumped back in his chair. "Okay, I knew," he admitted. "I found out a couple months ago when LaShonda went into the hospital. The doctors said I needed to get tested. I took the test and it came back positive." "And you didn't say anything to me or Almeta?" Aisha felt her insides shaking with anger. "You just kept infecting us?" "I was afraid!" Devante snapped at her. "You think it's easy to say something like that? Hey, by the way, I have HIV. I guess you must be infected too?" I was hoping it would go away. "It's gonna be okay?" Aisha couldn't believe her ears. "You hoped that somehow the deadly virus wouldn't be transmitted? Are you an idiot or just a monster?" Devante jumped up, his face contorted with anger. "Don't you dare call me a monster. Do you have any idea what it was like for me? To know that I was sick, that I might die. I was terrified." "And us?" Aisha screamed. "What about us? What about Almeta, who works 2 jobs to support you? What about me?" She took a step toward him, jabbing her finger into his chest. "You selfish, cowardly bastard! You don't deserve her or anyone else. You deserve to die alone." Devante's hand lunged forward, and Aisha felt a blow to her face. Her head jerked to the side, the taste of blood in her mouth. "Shut up!" he growled. "Just shut up! You don't understand anything!" Aisha recoiled, holding her cheek. The shock of the blow was quickly replaced by rage. She grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on, a heavy glass ashtray, and hurled it at Devante. He dodged, and the ashtray shattered against the wall. "Crazy bitch!" Devante shouted, lunging at her. Aisha bounced to the side, but her foot caught on the carpet, and she fell to the floor. Devante loomed over her, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think I like being sick?" he hissed. "You think I wanted this? I was just trying to live as normal a life as possible." "At the expense of others?" Aisha spat out, trying to get up. "At the expense of my sister? At the expense of me?" Devante grabbed her by the hair and yanked her up. Pain pierced her scalp. "You're just as guilty as I am," he growled. "Sleeping with your sister's husband. What kind of sister are you after that?" The words hurt more than a slap, because there was some truth in them. Aisha had indeed betrayed her sister by sleeping with her husband, but it was one thing to cheat, and quite another to knowingly contract a deadly disease. She twisted around and hit Devante in the groin with her knee. He groaned and loosened his grip. Aisha rolled to the side and jumped to her feet. On the kitchen table, she spotted a knife, a large one for cutting meat. Without thinking, she grabbed it. "Get out of here," she said, pointing the knife at Devante. "Just get out before I call the police." Devante stood up, holding his bruised arm. His eyes were filled with rage. "This is my house," he gritted through his teeth. "You're the one who has to get out." He took a step forward. Aisha gripped the hilt of the knife tighter. "Stay back," she warned him. "I mean it," Devante grinned. "Do you think you have the courage?" He took another step. "The girl with the knife, how scary." "Devante, I'm not kidding." Aisha's voice shook. "Stop." But he didn't stop. Step by step, he came closer, his face contorted in a vicious grin. "You know what I'm going to do?" he said quietly. "I'm going to tell Almeda that you infected me, that you slept around and brought this stuff into our family. Who do you think she'll believe? Her husband or her whore sister?" Something's broken inside Aisha. Everything that had accumulated over the days, the shock of the diagnosis, the fear of death, the realization of betrayal, the guilt she felt for her sister, all of it poured into one pure, uncontrollable rage. She didn't remember lunging forward. She didn't remember how the knife had entered Devante's body. She only remembered his surprised face and the warm blood on her hands. Devante staggered back and grabbed his stomach where the knife handle was sticking out. His eyes widened with shock. "You," he began, but blood rushed from his mouth, cutting off the words. He fell to his knees, still looking at Aisha in disbelief. Then he collapsed onto his side and fell silent. Aisha stood over him, breathing heavily. The reality of what was happening did not come to her immediately. She looked at her hands covered in blood, at the motionless body on the floor, and couldn't believe she had done it. "Devante?" she called softly, as if expecting him to answer. But there was no answer, just silence and the pounding of rain on the roof. Detective Quincy Rosser sighed heavily as he looked at the corpse of a young black man on the floor of the trailer. Another murder in a poor Conroe neighborhood. Another domestic dispute that ended in tragedy. Another case that will have to be investigated, even though it's already clear. "What have we got, Jenkins?" he asked a young officer, making notes in a notebook. "Victim is Devante Flood, 32 years old," he replied, checking his notes. "Discovered by his wife, Almeda Flood, when she returned from work at approximately 9:30 p.m. Cause of death was a stab wound to the abdomen. The murder weapon was a kitchen knife, which was still in the body at the time of discovery." Rosser nodded, surveying the crime scene. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Small trailer, cheap furniture, empty beer bottles, signs of a struggle. Typical of this neighborhood." "Wife under suspicion?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "No, sir, she's got a 100% alibi. She was at work at the Dawn Motel from 12 noon to 9 p.m., then at the laundromat until 2100 hours, plenty of witnesses." "Then who?" "We don't know yet, sir, no sign of forced entry. The victim probably knew the killer." Rosser took another look around the room. Something caught his eye on the kitchen table, a medicine cabinet. He stepped closer and read the names on the labels. "Antiretrovirals," he muttered. "Our guy was HIV positive." "Does this have anything to do with the murder?" Jenkins asked. "Maybe," Rosser replied thoughtfully. "Where's the wife now?" In a squad car. Officer Rodriguez is with her. All right, I'll talk to her. Also, canvass the neighborhood. See if anyone saw or heard anything. Exiting the trailer, Rosser headed toward the police car where a young black woman sat. Her eyes were red with tears, and her hands nervously fiddled with the hem of her blouse. Mrs. Flood? Rosser addressed her. I'm Detective Quincy Rosser. I need to ask you a few questions. Almeda Flood looked up at him with a weary look and nodded. Tell me what happened tonight, Rosser asked, pulling out a notebook. I got home from work around 10:30, Almeda began in a low voice. Usually I come early, but today I was late at the laundry. A lot of orders. The door was unlocked, which is odd. Devante always locks it. I walked in and... Her voice trembled. I saw him on the floor. There was blood all over the room. I screamed and ran out to the neighbors. They called the police. When was the last time you saw your husband alive? In the morning before he left for work. He was still asleep. Do you know if he had any enemies? Maybe he'd had a conflict with someone recently? Almeida thought about it. I don't think so. Devante was, quiet, kept to himself. He had a few friends, but I don't know that he ever had a serious fight with anyone. What about his health? Rosser asked cautiously. We found antiretroviral drugs in your house. Almeida's face contorted with surprise and shock. What kind of drugs? Drugs for people with HIV, Rosser explained. You didn't know? Almeida covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with sobs. No, she said. I didn't know. He didn't say anything. Oh my God. Rosser gave her a moment to calm down. Then he continued, Is there anyone who might have wanted your husband dead? Maybe someone who knew about his diagnosis? Almeida shook her head, still in shock at the news. I really don't know. We need to talk to Jelani, his friend. He lives 2 trailers away from us. Maybe he knows something. We'll definitely talk to him, Rosser assured me. What about family? Devante have any family in town? No, his parents are dead and he hasn't been in touch with his brother. And your family? Just a little sister, Aisha. She lives near here, works at the Rusty Nail Bar. Rosser made a note in his notebook. All right, we'll talk to her too. Can you stay with someone tonight? We can't go back to your house yet. I'll call Aisha. Almeida nodded. We can stay at her place. Rosser expressed his condolences again and went back to the trailer. Inside, the forensics team was already finishing their work, taking pictures and collecting evidence. Anything interesting? He asked the chief expert. Not much, he replied. A typical struggle pattern, a few fingerprints that probably belonged to the victim and his wife. But we found this. He showed the evidence bag, a long black hair. Judging by the length, it doesn't belong to the victim or his wife. She had a shorter haircut. Rosser took the bag, looking at the hair. All right, run it for DNA. Also send someone to the Rusty Nail Bar. Mrs. Flood's sister, Aisha Dunkley, works there. I need to talk to her. The next morning, Rosser sat in his office, going over the preliminary reports. Nothing out of the ordinary. Devante Flood was killed with a single stab to the abdomen. He died of blood loss. No sign of forced entry or robbery. Killer most likely knew the victim and was let into the house. A knock on the door interrupted his musings. Come in, he said. Officer Jenkins entered the office. Sir, we've interviewed the neighbors. One woman, Mrs. Parker, claims she saw Aisha Dunkley leaving the Flood's trailer at about 6 p.m. On the day of the murder, she said Dunkley looked very upset and scared. It was 3.5 hours before the body was discovered by Almeda Flood. Rosser straightened in his chair. Now that's interesting. Anything else? Yeah, we found Aisha Dunkley. She didn't show up for work yesterday and today. Her supervisor said she called in sick. Where is she now? In her trailer. Almeda Flood is with her. All right. Rosser stood up. Let's go visit the sisters. Aisha Dunkley's trailer was even smaller than the Flood's. One room that served as both bedroom and living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom the size of a closet. Typical dwelling for a low-paid waitress. Almeda opened the door, looking even more exhausted than the day before. Detective Rosser? She nodded, recognizing him. Come in. Inside, a young woman, very much like Almeida, but with sharper facial features, sat on the couch. Her eyes were red and a bruise was visible on her cheek. Aisha Dunkley? Rosser addressed her. I'm Detective Quincy Rosser. I need to ask you some questions about Devante Flood. Aisha nodded without looking up. Were you familiar with Mr. Flood? Of course, she answered quietly. He's my sister's husband. When was the last time you saw him? Aisha cast a quick glance at her sister, then lowered her head again. I don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago. That's odd, Rosser said, pulling out a notebook. Mrs. Parker, a neighbor of the Floods, claims she saw you leaving their trailer about 6 o'clock last night. Is that true? Almeda turned sharply toward her sister. What? You were at our place yesterday? Aisha continued to stare at the floor. I came by for a little while, she said barely audibly. I wanted to talk to Devante. About what? Rosser asked. It's personal. Aisha finally looked up, her eyes wide with despair. Family matters. Your son-in-law was killed that day, Rosser said stiffly. All family matters are now relevant to the investigation. What were you two talking about? Aisha glanced at her sister again, then said, I wanted to borrow money from him. For rent. And what did he say? He wasn't home. I knocked, no one opened, so I left. Rosser made a note in his notebook. Mrs. Parker says you seemed very upset when you left the trailer. I was upset that I didn't catch him, Aisha snapped at him. I really needed the money. Rosser said. How did you get that bruise on your face? Aisha instinctively touched her cheek. I fell, in the bar, slipped on the wet floor. Strange. Your boss said you weren't at work yesterday or today. Aisha bit her lip, caught in a lie. I meant the day before yesterday. Rosser shook his head. Ms. Dunkley, I don't think you're telling the truth. We found a long black hair at the crime scene. I bet the DNA test will show it belongs to you. I told you I went in there, Aisha exclaimed. Of course it could be my hair. Aisha, Almeida said quietly, looking at her sister. What's going on? Why aren't you telling me? Before Aisha could answer, there was a knock on the door. Jenkins went to open it. A disheveled black man stood on the doorstep. I need to speak to a detective, he said nervously. I have information about Devante's murder. Rosser stepped out into the hallway. You are? Jelani Senegal, the man introduced himself. I was a friend of Devante's. Come in, Mr. Senegal. Rosser nodded. What did you want to tell me? Jelani looked back at the sisters and lowered his voice. I'd rather be alone. They stepped out onto the porch of the trailer. I hear there's a reward for information about the killer, Jelani began. If the information leads to an arrest, yes, Rosser said. What do you know? Devante and Aisha. Jelani nodded toward the trailer. They've been sleeping together. For months now, behind Almeta's back. Rosser raised an eyebrow. Now that's interesting. Are you sure? Positive. Devante told me himself. Bragged about it. Said he was paying her for sex. And Almeda didn't know? No, of course not. He kept it a secret. But that's not all. Jelani looked around as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping. Devante was sick. HIV. Found out a couple months ago when his ex, LaShonda, died of AIDS. He went to the clinic, got tested, positive. And did he tell Aisha? No. Jelani shook his head. Here's the thing. He didn't tell anyone. Not Almeda, not Aisha. Kept sleeping with both of them, knowing he could infect them. I told him it was a shitty thing to do, but he just waved it off. Rosser frowned. A picture was beginning to emerge. How do you know he didn't tell anyone? He'd been taking his meds in secret, hid them from Almeda, said if she found out, she'd kick him out, and he didn't want to lose the roof over his head. What about Aisha? Could she have found out? Jelani shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. Maybe. She'd been looking sick lately too. Maybe she caught it from him and found out. And that could give her a motive for murder, Rosser said thoughtfully. Exactly. Jelani nodded. If she found out he'd infected her with HIV, I'd be pissed too if I were her. Rosser thanked Jelani for the information, wrote down his contacts, and went back to the trailer. Aisha and Almeta sat in tense silence. Minus Ms. Dunkley, Rosser addressed Aisha. Are you sure you want to continue this game of silence? I have a witness who says you were intimate with Devante Flood. Almeta gasped, her eyes widening in shock. What? Aisha, is it true? Aisha covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. I have also been informed, Rosser continued, that Devontae Flood was aware of his HIV-positive status and concealed it from both of you by continuing unprotected sexual contact. Almeda turned pale, grabbing her throat. "Oh my God." "Aisha Dunkley," Rosser stood in front of her. "You have discovered that you are infected with HIV. You found out that the source of the infection was Devontae Flood, who knew of your status and deliberately put you at risk. You went to his home to confront him about your relationship. An argument ensued, during which you stabbed him. Is that correct?" Aisha slowly raised her head. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I killed him." Almeda made a strangled sound, as if she was short of breath. "Aisha, how could you? How could you both?" "I didn't mean to, I swear." Aisha turned to her sister. "I went to talk to him when I found out about the diagnosis. I thought maybe it was someone else who had infected me, but then I met Marcus and he told me about LaShonda, and then I found the medicine in Devontae's trailer." "He knew, Almeda. He knew, and he kept sleeping with both of us anyway." "Both of us," Almeda echoed. "You slept with my husband." "I'm so sorry," Aisha cried. "He was paying me. I needed the rent money. It started out as a deal, but then—" "Shut up!" Almeda shouted. "I don't want to hear it!" Rosser signaled to Jenkins, and he quietly stepped out of the trailer to call for backup. "Aisha Dunkley," Rosser said formally. "You are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Devontae Flood. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective read her rights, Almeda stared at her sister with an expression that mingled shock, pain, and disgust. Her world was crumbling before her eyes. Her husband was cheating on her with his own sister. He knew he had HIV and hid it, putting her in mortal danger. And now he was dead, murdered by her sister's hand. "I need to get tested," she mumbled, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. "I could be infected." "We'll arrange medical attention for you," Rosser assured her. "Now we need to take your sister to the station." Aisha didn't resist being handcuffed. She looked devastated, as if all the strength had left her body. "I'm sorry," she said to her sister as they led her out of the trailer. "I never meant to hurt you." Almeda didn't answer. She sat motionless, staring into the void in front of her. Her life as she knew it was over. Her husband was dead. Her sister was going to prison for murder, and she herself now had to live with the realization of a double betrayal and a possible fatal illness. Rosser walked out of the trailer following the officers leading Aisha to the patrol car. Another domestic murder, another broken fate, another day in Conroe, Texas.